I remember exactly the sound of my heels in that hallway. They echoed in a way I had never noticed before. Maybe because, that day, I was paying attention to everything, to the silence, to the closed doors, to the averted glances. That was the day they fired me. My name is Chloe and I will tell you my story. Yes, I was fired from the company my father founded. One room, two people, a decision already made. Fred didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. I could tell he was happy to do that. Look, Chloe, we are restructuring the teams. We need to innovate. We need new people who can do more, he said to me. You don't fit in with the team anymore. I swallowed hard, but I wanted to cry. I had worked at that company my whole life. I loved what I did, but I was exhausted from working under Fred's management. He was a terrible boss. He treated his employees badly. My father wouldn't want to leave him in that position if he were still alive. That was a defeat for me. That company was more than just a job. It was part of my identity. I grew up listening to my father dream about it. I saw the first meetings take place in our dining room. I remember him thrilled with the first contract, the all-nighters, the words he said to me. One day, all of this will be yours, Chloe. But only if you understand that the value of a company lies in its people. I believed in that with all my heart. And perhaps that was exactly what got me out of there. Because, in the end, the power game screams louder when those in charge forget to listen. I left with the sound of the elevators behind me and a certainty embedded in my chest. I hadn't failed. They had forgotten who really made that company happen. The following month was strange. A mix of mourning and liberation. I slept more than I should have, ate less than I needed, spent days staring at the ceiling, wondering if my father would be ashamed of me. I started talking to people at the company, discreetly. I wanted to know how things were going there. I had left, but I didn't want all my father's efforts to go to waste. Some of the people I talked to were still there, while others had left a few years ago. I discovered things that made me sick. Stories of harassment that had been hushed up, promotions denied due to favoritism, talents ignored. All of this in the name of a toxic culture that masqueraded as high performance. And then something began to dawn on me. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. The clarity that if I ever had the chance to return, I wouldn't return as a supporting character. I would return as the protagonist. And that chance came sooner than I expected. 3 months later, I received an unexpected call from one of the oldest partners, one of those who still respected my father's legacy, who wanted to meet with me. He spoke in a low but firm voice. Chloe, the situation is getting out of control. Fred is destroying everything. The numbers have dropped, morale has dropped, and we need you to take his place. I took a deep breath. It was early, I was still recovering, but at that moment, I understood that it wasn't about me. It was about something bigger. It was about putting back on track the years of dedication my father had shown, and I was willing to do my best to rebuild the company. I accepted the invitation to a meeting with the shareholders. I arrived with an honest speech, without promising magic, without seeking applause. I spoke about values, listening, about true leadership. And for the first time in a long time, I saw eyes light up. I saw nods. I saw doors open. A few days later, Fred was removed. The decision was almost unanimous, and I was able to be present on that day. In the room, he looked at me as if he wanted to scream at me. Are you going to replace me with her? You're crazy, he said. She's not capable of leading. She never was. I remained silent, because I knew that actions spoke louder than words. My effort would be enough to prove him wrong. And I was invited to take over. I accepted because I wanted to solve the problems I discovered too late. I spent an entire weekend alone, reviewing reports, remembering conversations, rereading my father's old notebooks, full of handwritten notes, each word reminding me of the reason it all started. People. It was always about people. Before officially taking over as CEO, I knew I needed to do something important, something no one expected. I called a general meeting of all employees, in the same room where Fred used to display inflated charts and pat the same faces on the back. This time the atmosphere was different. People entered slowly, whispering among themselves. The mood was one of curiosity mixed with caution. No one knew exactly what to expect from me. But I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I stood there alone, without slides, without a microphone. just with my voice and my heart. Some of you know me, I began. Others have only heard about me, but today I am not here to introduce myself. I am here to say that I did not return to take power. I returned to restore trust. The room fell silent. For the first time in years, someone was truly listening. That moment was a turning point. I was in front of a team that had been mistreated, discredited, silenced. People with real talent, stifled by rigid processes and a leadership that confused rigidity with competence. I continued. I know that many of you here are tired. Maybe you have lost faith. Maybe you have thought about leaving. And, to be honest, I understand. I have thought about it myself, but I want to invite you to stay, because what we are going to build now is not just a new management, it is a new culture. It was then that I saw the first shy smiles. They were not of excitement, but of relief, of people who felt that, for the first time, they were being taken seriously. And so I went to war, the hardest war, the war against old habits. In the first few weeks, my agenda was just one: to listen. I sat down with each team, each manager, each analyst, each intern, asked what hurt, what worked, what they dreamed of seeing differently. People who had never been heard before suddenly could speak up, and they spoke up forcefully. We reformulated the feedback loops, removed metrics that didn't make sense, created internal reporting channels with real security. And above all, we made it clear, respect is not a bonus, it's a foundation. Diversity is not marketing, it's a priority. Of course, not everyone stayed. Some felt threatened, others refused to give up old privileges. But honestly, I preferred a smaller, engaged team than a castle full of masks. Over time, something began to blossom. The meetings became more lively, conflicts began to be resolved with maturity. Ideas began to come from all sides. And the company, that cold entity that seemed like a giant made of steel, regained its face, voice, and soul. Time was passing and I was seeing the changes happening. For me, that was already a victory. One day, while I was reviewing some spreadsheets with the product team, I received an email from Laura, a junior analyst in the customer service department. She said, "Chloe, I went to bed smiling yesterday. It's been years since I've done that after work. Thank you for letting us breathe again." I cried. It was that simple. In the middle of a random afternoon, between numbers and reports, I allowed myself to feel that emotion, because it wasn't just about strategy, it was about healing. And healing takes work, but it also gives meaning. We began to reap the first fruits. Customers who had drifted away came back. Old partners regained their trust, and the numbers, began to respond. Sustainable growth, without tricks. The foundation was solid because it came from the right people. But, of course, not everything was rosy. The change caused noise, and there were those who tried to sabotage, spread rumors, and manipulate the boards. Old employees who still had the same habits that Fred's management cultivated had to face bruised egos, slammed doors, and tense meetings. But the more they tried to discredit me, the more I remembered my father's words. You don't have to shout to be strong. You just have to be firm and just. And so, with firmness and justice, I began to gain ground. Not because of my strong surname, but because of my daily work, because of the trust one worked to ensure that my employees had in me, because of my consistency, my active listening, and the courage to admit when I made mistakes too, because I made a lot of mistakes. One night, after another intense round of difficult decisions, I left the company close to midnight. I got in my car, turned on the radio at a low volume, and cried. I cried for everything that had come before, for everything that was coming now. It wasn't sadness, it was exhaustion. And gratitude. It was as if I was finally taking the place that had always been mine, but that I had had to rebuild myself, with my hands, with an open heart, and with the courage that, for a while, I thought I had lost. But I knew that the hard work would bear good fruit, and it was already bearing fruit. The work was making it worth it. In the following days, I promoted Paula, one of the most brilliant customer service professionals, to a leadership position that she already held in practice, while her former boss took credit. We rehired Marcio, a brilliant product engineer who had left out of frustration after being repeatedly overlooked for promotions. We restructured the HR department from top to bottom. I read every complaint forgotten in the drawers of the former management, Several managers were quietly dismissed, people who cultivated microenvironments of fear, silence, and manipulation. And then, with a full heart, I launched something that was an old dream of my father's, an internal recognition program. A transparent, collaborative system where good ideas are recognized, no matter where they come from. No more favoritism, no more pats on the back only for those who dress like the boss. We created a space where talent shines, where women, Black people, LGBTQIA+ people, neurodivergent people, and everyone who was once a diversity fit is now an essential part of leadership. The changes were felt almost physically. One day, late at night, I was walking through the hallways. The atmosphere was different, lighter, more lively. I heard laughter in the break room, not the forced kind of laughter of someone who needs to please, but genuine laughter. I saw tables decorated with plants, family photos, children's toys, things that had gradually disappeared as the company became a hostile environment. And there, in a hallway near engineering, someone had written on a whiteboard, "She's back." 2 words underlined twice. I stood there, reading and rereading them. Not "she took the position," not "she won," just "she's back," as if the return of a mindset was more important than any position. The following week, I went to the CEO's old office, not because I needed the space to prove anything, but because the moment called for it. The sign now read, Chloe Monroe, Executive Director. Simple, clean letters. I brought a few things from my old office. A picture frame. My father and I, smiling on the day the company opened. I placed the photo on the corner of the table and sat down, not with a sense of achievement, but with the sweet weight of responsibility. It had been exactly 1 year since I was fired. 1 year since Fred told me that I wasn't what the company needed. Now, not only was I back, but I was what it needed to be. It was in this atmosphere that we held the company's first major listening forum. No stage, no microphones. Chairs in a circle, coffee, juice, and cheese bread. The idea was simple. Everyone speaks, no one is interrupted, and no one needs to have an answer right away. We had moments of tears, emotional confessions, and silences full of stories. One of the most striking was the testimony of Rebecca from the finance department. She told how she felt invisible for years, about the day she tried to share an idea that could have saved the company millions, but was silenced with a "it's not your job to think about that." At that moment, one of the new managers, recently promoted based on merit, not friendship, stood up and said, "Rebecca, I want to talk to you. I think your idea still has a future." And there, without much ceremony, we saw how culture changes, not with empty slogans, but with simple and courageous actions. A few weeks later, I sat down to review the quarterly report. It was the best performance we had seen in the last 5 years. But that was not all. Customer satisfaction had grown by 23%, talent retention had increased by 41%, revenue was breaking records. Yes, but the most beautiful thing was how we achieved all of this in an ethical, collaborative, and transparent way. Meetings stopped being veiled wars. Coffees became spaces for real exchange. People laughed, listened to each other. There was no longer fear of expressing opinions, of making mistakes, of being who they are. Diversity in leadership had doubled. Finally, we were not just hiring good people, we were giving them space to flourish. One day, while I was reading a report, I heard a soft knock on the door that pulled me out of my thoughts. "Come in," I said, closing the report. It was Maya, now the Director of Customer Experience. She, who had been invisible for years in a middle-level position, was now leading meetings with authority and determination. Her face, illuminated behind her glasses, betrayed an infectious enthusiasm. "They're waiting in the conference room," she said. I stood up slowly, smoothing my blazer, and replied with a smile, "Let's go." The meeting room was different, not because of the decor, but because of the presence. For the first time in the company's history, half of the board was made up of women, and several members were under 40. They brought more difficult questions, yes, but also fresh ideas, more human decisions. In the center of the table was Dr. Isaac, one of the new strategic consultants. Intelligent, thoughtful, and above all, someone my father would trust. Not because he thought the same way, but because he respected people. Before the meeting began, Dr. Isaac looked at me and said, "Chloe has a few words." I hadn't planned to speak, but when all eyes turned to me, I didn't feel judgment. I felt respect. And I realized I had something important to say. I took a deep breath and began. This is the moment my father prepared me for. The words came out before I could even think, but they were true. Being there at that table, in front of a diverse, modern, attentive board, brought me a clarity I had never felt before. I want to thank all of you for believing in change, for making the hard decisions when the easy ones would have been safer, and for helping me rebuild a company that ultimately puts people before power. I paused, not for dramatic effect, but to let the words settle into the space. Someone once told me that I didn't have what it took to lead, that I lacked strength, drive, presence. But today I understand. Leadership is not about shouting the loudest, dominating a room with arrogance, or hiding behind a badge with 3 pompous words on it. Leadership is vision, it's responsibility, and it's courage. The courage to do what's right, even when it's inconvenient. I smiled. And this time, it wasn't Chloe's practice smile that needed to prove something. It was mine. My father built this company on these values. He wasn't perfect, but he always said, treat people with dignity and they will surprise you. Today, I'm proud to say that we are finally living up to his dream. A respectful silence filled the room, and then came the applause. It wasn't deafening, it wasn't performance-based. It was sincere, the kind of applause that warms you up. That stays with you. That afternoon, I didn't go straight back to my office. I made a point of walking around the entire building. I walked through the hallways I knew with my eyes closed. Not as a CEO, but as someone who belongs to that space. I passed by the IT team and greeted the team with a thanks for the effort in yesterday's launch. In the design room, I played with the sketches on the wall and praised a bold idea. In marketing, I high-fived the interns who had just launched their first national campaign. Their enthusiasm was contagious. In the kitchen, someone had made cupcakes for a colleague's last day. I took one, sat on the couch next to 2 analysts, and we talked about bad movies that we still love. It wasn't about reports. It wasn't about performance, it was just people being people. And it was there, in that simple and unpretentious moment, that everything made sense to me. It wasn't just about winning a corporate dispute or turning around a negative situation. It wasn't about titles, achievements, or proving something to the world. It was about creating a place where people wanted to be, where they felt seen, heard, important. The following week, I received a voicemail from my mother. She didn't usually send voicemails, so I was curious. Daughter, your father would be so proud. The company has gone back to being what he always believed it could be. And you found your own way to lead, without imitating anyone, just being yourself. Hearing that disarmed me. For a moment, I shed a tear in the middle of the empty room. Not out of sadness, but out of fulfillment, of duty fulfilled. Yes, I was back. Yes, I had taken on the position that had been denied to me. But most importantly, I had transformed that place into something better than it had ever been before. And that, for me, was victory enough. Today, it no longer mattered if Fred ever doubted my abilities. What mattered was that I was doing a good job respecting my father's legacy. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone.